Now, I haven't even looked at this video. Why? Because I know this is one of those really good YouTubers who is reliable when it comes to content. She doesn't over-exaggerate, she does her research, and she thinks things through. I enjoy her content. So when I see something like this being posted, I'm like, this is a good video to do a reaction to. So she's titled it 9 Biggest Lies About Australia People Keep Believing. Let's find out what they are.
If you're planning to come to Australia, whether it is to live or for a visit, in this video we're going to talk about the biggest misconceptions people have about Australia and Australians that are simply not true. So if you're interested, keep watching. The first misconception about Australians that people have is that all Australians know how to surf. As you may know, Australia has some of the most beautiful beaches in the world, and with that, surfing and swimming are naturally very popular sports. And indeed, many Australians who live near the water or by the coast tend to be great surfers or at least do it as a hobby. But this doesn't mean that everyone knows how to surf. In fact, research by Royal Lifesaving Australia reports that 1 in 4 adults in Australia are either weak swimmers or can't swim, so let alone surfing. So that's a massive misconception that many people have about Australians in general. And having said that, if you're coming to Australia for a visit and you don't know how to swim, I highly recommend taking some lessons if you want to get in the water. Otherwise, don't do it because it's very risky and tourist drownings are actually a thing in this country.
So a few corrections. I think saying that many of the people who live in coastal areas are surfers is possibly an over-exaggeration. I think you have pockets of areas that have a surfing culture, like towns that have a surf club will have a far stronger surfing culture where you get, school-age kids who are part of the surf club and they go and do activities with the surf club. But at the same time, you have many, many towns and cities that don't have that surfing culture. So I don't know the statistics, but I don't think it's quite as huge as what you would think from being told that many people who live in coastal areas surf. Having grown up in Tassie, where there were some really good surf beaches within a 20-minute, half-hour drive of where I lived, I would have to say of all the people I knew, probably only a small handful were surfers. I know of little towns where they have a surf club, and then a lot of the kids in the school will go to the surf club after school and be members of the surf club. And that's where you do get a stronger surf culture. But if you have towns that don't have surf clubs, then chances are those kids might use boogie boards out on the beach, but there's no interest in surfing. I think obviously you've got various places up and down the east coast that are popular surfing places, and that's where you get the surfing culture. But I wouldn't say that if you went to any coastal area that you could expect many people there to be surfers, unless it was a surfing town, if that makes sense. Now, as for 25% of the population not being strong swimmers, I would say that's probably the older population. These days, I believe most states have learned to swim now in schools. I know in Tassie that's the thing. I believe from grades 3 to 5 is learn to swim. And I'd imagine that exists in most other states. Let me know if you're in another state and you know what the status is there in terms of learn to swim in schools. As for if you are a tourist heading to Australia and you want to go swimming at the beach, I'm a little bit uncomfortable with the advice of learn to swim beforehand, and if you can't swim, don't go in the ocean, because there's a huge difference between swimming in a swimming pool and swimming at the beach. those of us who grew up in Australia near the beach were in the waves from probably before we could walk. And many of us grew up being tumbled by the waves, getting dunked when you really didn't want to be by the waves, and learning to respect the waves, learning to respect the beach. It is a different style of swimming, and I think for a novice, an inexperienced swimmer, someone who's not a strong swimmer, then you need to be extremely cautious. So if you are coming from overseas and you are not used to swimming in the surf, swimming at the beach, and you're not a strong swimmer, especially if you only just learnt to swim to go overseas, I wouldn't say don't go in the water, but I would strongly recommend that you do not go in the water further than waist deep. And even then, I would only go in if you're at a beach that has lifeguards and you're in an area swimming between the flags, because, like I said, it is very different from swimming in a pool. And she's so right. There are quite often tourists who get swept out and drown or come close to drowning. And a lot of lifeguards spend a lot of their time rescuing people who just don't know how to swim at the beach. Okay, moving on.
Now, the second misconception I always hear about Australia, and so many people keep leaving comments about that and asking me about that, is that there are dangerous animals everywhere, even snakes coming out of the toilet. And while it is true that Australia is home to some of the most deadliest creatures in the world, it also has many unique and diverse wildlife that it's not necessarily dangerous unless you disturb them. So urban areas, that is cities, are generally safe, and it's very rare that you are actually going to come across an animal, a kangaroo or a koala or even a snake. It's very, very rare. You actually have to get out of your way to see wildlife, and it's very likely that if you're a tourist, you'll actually have to end up going to a reserve to try to see some wildlife, or perhaps if you go to a national park, you might spot some wallabies or kangaroos.
She's so spot on. I mean, realistically, it's about knowing where the habitats of these dangerous animals, etc., are, and observing the signage. The signage is there for a reason. And, you know, simple things like in Australia, we know you don't stray off the path when you're bushwalking because it's not safe. Not that you're likely to encounter anything, but you're even far less likely to encounter anything if you stay on the path. If you do encounter a snake, the chances of you actually getting bitten by it are really low, unless you are dumb. Okay, you may be unfortunate. I've seen copperhead snakes that actually, when they're surprised, will rear up and strike, and that's a scary thing. That happened to me. Thankfully, I was driving, and so it was actually only trying to strike at my car, not at me. But, you know, for the most part, if you're out in the bush and you see a snake, then you just stand still a fair distance away from it and let it go. It's not going to come after you. It's just going to go about its business. It's going to head off, and then you can carry on down the path. As for poisonous spiders, I'm not sure if we've ever had any spider deaths in Australia. Yes, there are some rather venomous spiders that will give you a nasty bite that will need medical attention, but you're not going to die. As for sharks, goes back to the comment of swimming at a patrolled beach between the flags, and you should be safe. I mean, at the end of the day, that's all it is. It's about not going into their territory. if you're heading to Australia and you want to go check out Sydney, chances are you're not going to come across any dangerous critters. It's only when you go out into nature that you need to just be aware. And if you follow common sense, you follow advice, then it's not a problem.
Okay, another misconception that many people have that Australians use slang for absolutely everything and that you won't understand a thing of what they are saying. The reality is that at the beginning, perhaps if English is not your first language, you might struggle a bit with the Australian accent. And of course, there are some slang words that you have to get familiar with in order to understand what they mean, right? So if someone says, oh, let's meet this arbo means afternoon. So it is true that there's some slang, but that doesn't mean that you'll come here and you won't be able to communicate. Not at all. But the reality, of course, again, is that if you're not an English native speaker and perhaps like me, you were used to the American or the British accent, perhaps during the first few months or the first year, you may struggle a bit with the accent, but the good news is that Australians are super, super kind and they won't have any issues in helping you with that, yeah? And something else to know is that Australia is super multicultural. So you will get to hear many different accents from all over the world, so don't worry about it.
I don't think there's really much more to add to that, is there? I know you hear people who come to Australia who comment that sometimes there are words that they don't understand, but generally you can understand from the context of the sentence. So, recently with a case I was covering on my other channel, I constantly kept referring to Macca's instead of McDonald's. But they knew in the context that's what I was talking about. And I even had someone say to me, oh, I'm going to start calling it Macca's from now on. In reverse, I heard them referring to it as Mickey D's. I'd never heard it referred to as Mickey D's before, but I figured that out. So, it's all contextual. Yeah, we do shorten a lot of words and stuff, but I think, people adjust pretty quickly, and it's not like every single word we use is different. We're not speaking a different language, we're still speaking English.
Okay, another big misconception that many people have is that Australia has no culture. Everything is all about nice beaches. So basically tourists, they think that Australia, it's only a place where you go to the beach and that's it. But Australia is more than that. Cities like Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane offer amazing cultural experiences and have world-class art galleries and museums featuring Australian, Indigenous and international art. The performing arts scene, music festivals and sporting events are also a very important part of the Australian culture and identity. So if you ever come to visit here, I highly recommend not limiting yourself to just going to the Great Barrier Reef, but actually exploring all the cultural activities Australia has to offer. It will be naturally very different to what you find, for example, in Europe, but again, it's another side of Australia that perhaps not many people know about.
I think right there is one of the things that makes her channel so great. She doesn't just stick with accepted stereotypes. She thinks outside the box. And she's so spot on. We do have a culture, and we have a strong arts culture. Shows, arts, festivals. We do have some pretty awesome museums. Even in Tasmania, the Mona, the Museum of New and Old Art. No, you know what I'm trying to say. The Mona Museum, that is that's world class. A National Gallery of Australia, world class. And you also have places like the war memorials, which are so worth a visit. And I think one thing that she missed off here is the bushwalking you can do, or the subtropical rainforest areas in Queensland and everything, or even the outback. You can go to Uluru, it's not just all coastal stuff. Tasmania, you could do so many different bushwalks. You've got the alpine regions. So, yeah, well said. Australia is so much more than just a beach culture.
Another big misconception is that Australia is always hot, all year round. And again, while it is true that Australia is known for its warm climate, the reality is that this is a huge country with a wide range of weather patterns. In the northern areas, for example, you'll definitely find a more tropical climate with wet and dry seasons, but in the southern regions, you'll experience cold winters and in some parts even snowfall. So it's not all hot and humid as many people think. We actually have a bit of everything in that regard. So if you're a tourist coming to Melbourne or Sydney, remember please to bring a jacket, especially during the winter months or in autumn and spring, because it does get cold.
And of course, if you go to Tasmania, no matter what time of year, you also need to make sure that you have warm clothes with you as well. I'm so glad that she's mentioned this in terms of the different climates, because the range of climates in Australia is quite huge, and this whole misconception that Australia is just so hot is crazy. And you know what? The hottest place in the world is not in Australia, it's in the USA, from what I've been told. One of the deserts. I mean, you just have to go to Texas, and people in Texas will laugh at us in Australia when we're complaining because it's hot and it's 40 degrees, because that's just normal heat for them. So it's kind of amusing that there is this whole notion that Australia is so hot. That's like saying that America is hot. You've got some places in America that are hot, some places that are cold. We have diverse climates here.
Another misconception that people who've never been to Australia have is that all Australians live in the outback. And while it is true that Australia is famous for its outback, most Aussies actually live in urban or suburban areas. Cities like Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, Perth are huge cities with modern infrastructure and a wide range of landscapes, including rainforests, mountains, and coastal plains. So it's not all desert, as many people think.
I recently looked at a video where someone was basically trying to claim that Australia was outback and coast. And that was pretty much all. They forgot that we have bushland, that we have cities, that we have suburban areas. Because, yeah, there is a lot of outback in Australia, but the bulk of the population doesn't live in the outback.
Another misconception, and this is more of a stereotype that many people have, is that Australians are all tall, white, blonde, and fit, and they all surf, as I said before. And this is something that we were discussing with my Australian partner. We were wondering, why do people always have that image? And even in Argentina, where I'm originally from, when there's some kind of reference to Australia, for some reason, they always portray Australians as these blonde surfers or safari guys. And that's far from the truth. Australia is a nation of migrants, as well as people from Aboriginal heritage. It's super multicultural. You're going to find people from all over the world, and we all look very different. So it's a huge misconception to think that everyone looks like this guy. No, yeah, it's interesting.
That's such a great point. And to be honest, I would have to think really, really hard to try and think of anybody I know who fits that surfer stereotype. Even one of my close friends who does go surfing regularly, and her young children now go surfing with her as well. She's the total opposite of the surfer stereotype. So, good point.
Okay, another very big misconception is that all Australians are descendants of convicts. Well, it is true that British convicts settled in Australia in the late 18th and early 19th centuries. The majority of Aussies today are not direct descendants of convicts. Again, as I said before, Australia is a nation made of migrants, Aboriginal peoples, so it's not that all Australians are descendants of convicts, as many people think.
It's even worse when you hear people refer to us as being convicts. Just because we have a penal colony background. I mean, sure, I've got convicts in my heritage, if you go back almost 200 years. I think looking at Dad's side of the family, I believe they came to Australia in like the 1850s. Well, that certainly doesn't make me a convict. I also have a lot of other influences in my genealogy that are not convict heritage. And she's so spot on, you know. Yes, there is a population of people who have several generations of being Australian and probably can trace back to one or two convicts. But you look at the large migrant population in Australia and, you know, no convict blood there. So, yeah, I have to say it is one of the things that really bugs me when you hear people talking about Australians being convicts and laughing about it because they think they're making a joke. Well, you know, we're talking about many generations removed for starters if we do have convicts in our heritage. And most of us are pretty highly educated, and the convict heritage is pretty much irrelevant. And yeah, the rest of the population, no convict heritage.
Another big misconception that many people have is that Australians have Vegemite with every single meal, and this is not true. Well, it is true that Australians love their Vegemite, at least most Aussies that I know, they love it, and we actually have, even here, we have Vegemite. It's an essential part of our house. That doesn't mean that Australians eat Vegemite with every single meal. Usually you have it as an afternoon snack or perhaps in the morning, but not every single day. So yeah, that's another misconception, I guess.
I think she has mentioned in the past that her husband likes his Vegemite kind of strong. But I have to say, that's too much Vegemite if you ask me. I would go with probably half that. You would have to be a real hardcore Vegemite lover to put that much on your toast. Yep, I have Vegemite in the cupboard. Do I have it every day? No. I might have it every day for a while if I have bought crumpets, because I love crumpets with butter and Vegemite. If I'm out somewhere and I'm buying stuff from the bakery, I might occasionally buy myself a cheese and Vegemite scroll. But no, it's not something that I do have on a daily basis. I keep it in the cupboard. I do have it on a semi-regular basis, sometimes more frequently than other times. But yeah, no, it's not a everyday thing. I think we can agree that this was another well thought out, highly intelligent video from Martina. It's good to see that she's posting again because there was a while where she wasn't really putting much content out. I think she decided she just needed a break from it. So I was glad when this came up in my feed. I will, of course, provide the link for this video in the description for my video here. I'll also provide the link for her channel if you want to go over and subscribe. She has so many really good videos that are worth watching. I highly recommend her. She's been in Australia for quite some time now, so she knows what she's talking about, and she's just sensible, which is sometimes lacking. So I'll leave it at that. Thanks for listening. If you are new to my channel, please subscribe. Also, hit the like button and please leave a comment below. YouTube loves it when you do that. It just gets my video out there into the algorithm and gets it seen by more people. On that note, thank you, and I'll catch you in the next one.